A curse fell on our hometown, the legacy of a sinister tradition. The local Molfar, a magician who was to sacrifice one of his descendants to the dark forest forces, could not do it, dooming the city and surrounding areas to death and destruction. Years have passed, and the memory of Svetlograd has tormented the hearts of his family. A decision was made to return there and end the darkness forever, to free the city and give the people an opportunity to live normally. Each member of the family had their own unique skills, strengths and weaknesses to complement each other perfectly. They gathered some equipment and travelled there to the meeting. The Legacy is a cooperative survival game set in a horror genre for up to 4 players. It's being published by Rock Game SA, who are also the ones who are publishing Astromedica, and they once again reached out to me to let me know that there was a demo and to give it a go. Now, with a fair bit to get through, we might as well try and break this down into chunks where I'll run through what I found odd, things that I found a little bit okay, then things that I actually found were quite off, finishing off with the things that I felt were rather good. For things that were a bit odd, so things where you would actually look at them in the game and you might scratch your head a little bit wondering why did they choose to do it that particular way. The main one here is simply just the way that the hands of the character model work, specifically when you're actually eating. They've curved the hand so that they've got a very odd angle so that they can pick the food from the other hand and then move it to your mouth while you're eating. And the angle of the hand just makes me think that it's really uncomfortable for you to be able to do any form of eating in the game. The other one itself was kind of the static nature of the trade vehicle. And you walk up to the person and they are quite literally very static. And it would have been nicer if they'd actually set up a shop. So instead of having a ute where they're just sort of standing on the back of it. You know, one time I was attacked by a zombie and they're still just standing there watching me get beat up. They could have a van, which has a sideboard that opens up and they're doing their trading out of the vehicle. And I suspect that a lot of the stuff as we go through this, we'll probably find that it is assets and the way that they've actually put them together. And this leads us into the things that I felt were a little bit mid. You know, those things that, you know, look like they could have done a bit of a better job. Not so much that they're odd, that they're just not quite there in terms of what could have actually been done. And for me, that would actually be the level design of the world itself. Now, it feels like they've just grabbed a bunch of assets and they've placed them at random places to try and put together a map without really thinking about the cohesion of all of those things that are going on. And, you know, the barren nature of some of these houses when you walk in there and there's just like a single item that's sort of been left on the floor. They're a little bit reminiscent of DayZ, I guess, in that regard. You sort of go in there, you walk into a building and there might be, you know, a bit of ammo on the floor, or you might find a piece of food on a desk, but that's the only thing that you actually find in the building, and with nothing else to interact with except for the occasional fireplace. Everything just seems very sparse, where there's really an opportunity to sort of flesh that out and make it seem like there's more things to interact with. And, you know, it could even be a destructible environment where there's pictures and things like that on the walls that you can smash and harvest for resources, and it'll probably make it just that little bit nicer from the survival element, rather than just having a house that exists with nothing in it but a single item that you might need to pick up. The other parts of the things that were mid was really about the, I guess this really comes down to the demo itself, but I never actually found a rock. There was just no rocks. You know, once I found an axe in a box somewhere, I was then able to hit a stone boulder, and that boulder produced a rock, which I could then use to make my own stone axe. But just right off the bat from the survival element, if you don't have a weapon or you don't have an axe or a pick, you can't get that rock in the first instance to be able to create your very first axe so that you can break apart the trees and the boulders so that you can get more of those resources. And that basic, you know, introductory level item seemed to be missing, where you were being able to craft that very first tool in your survival challenge was missing. And now for the things that I felt were a bit off and really should be changed because they had quite a negative impact on the gameplay experience. And the main thing here would be the different UI prompts for doing the various actions as you went along. And the examples here would be when you pick up items or when you search zombies after you've killed them. When you hover over them, it would give you an outline of the creature or the object and prompt you with the key to interact with the object, in this case F, and you would then be able to pick up the items directly. Similar with like opening and closing doors and things like that. But then if you wanted to interact with a tree, we say a knife, you would then have a timed element where you would get a circle that would progress as you were harvesting from the tree. In terms of fireplaces, the fireplaces had its own UI element where it wanted you to place a fire lighting tool within the fireplace with some food and some fuel, but then you would need to leave that interface, take another fire lighting element and use that fire lighting element on the fireplace, also not with a prompt, you just used it and it happened. Then there was also the fact that you could eat directly from bushes. So rather than the usual way where you have an item in your inventory, which you would need to drag onto your hotbar so that you could use the item and allowing you to eat it, in this case, you could then just get your use action on the bush and eat it directly from the bush, rather than getting the item into your inventory and being able to put it on your bar and eating it. Where I would also have liked you to have a interactive option within the inventory. Say you right click on the item, you get a menu of options where you could choose to eat an item rather than being forced to bring it down onto your hotbar, where you might want all of your weapons and highly used items, and then in the interface you just click to eat and it would then take you back to the game and show you the eating action. And so there were a number of things like that where, because the experience for each individual one was different, it made me think that they've got different developers working on different UI elements where the actions should be similar, and so as a result you've lost that cohesion through all of the different actions, and it felt like you were playing something that was designed differently for each individual one. Now, for the next part will be the things that I was not able to get to. And this is because the demo was restricted with no save system, and there were a number of items that we weren't allowed to actually do. And so in the main game, it looks like there will be some form of a save system so that your progress isn't lost every time you quit the game. But because of that, I wasn't able to experience a number of things, because I might sit down and play for half an hour to an hour, and then when I would need to quit, I would lose all of my progress. So I never got around to looking at things like the magic system or the fishing. There were some events that seemed to happen over time where there was military turning up and there was an explosion that looked like there was some nuclear fallout and stuff. So there's certainly things that happen over time and events within the world, but you would obviously need to either save your progress or play for a very long time so that you can experience them. And then obviously the build system was actually locked down within the demo and you weren't allowed to do it, so I wasn't able to put down my own base. I just had the basic tent, whereas it would have been nice to build a nice enclave and start working on a multi-story building and all the things that sort of go with that survival element and set yourself up a base in the middle of the map. The other parts that were restricted is the overall map was only a portion of the available overall map, which I can understand from a demo perspective that you're being limited a little bit because they don't want to show off all of their cards. Now, as far as the things that were good, I found that the creature and the character pacing was actually quite nice. And so this will be your character as it's running around, as it's crouching. There was a couple of modes. It was basically the walk and the run mode, which were affected both the crouching, sneaking mode, as well as the standing, walking and running mode. And then with the creatures themselves, during the daytime, they looked rather slow as they're just sort of walking around the map. But as you got aggro or you shot them, the speed at which they were able to move towards you was actually quite nice. It sort of gave you that kind of a, oh gosh, I've got to deal with this sort of speed, rather than they move shambling towards you and you've got plenty of time to knock them down. And there was obviously that real satisfying time, because there's, at the very least, you can shoot them in bodies and arms and heads, and you get different hit registration, and you'll see that the health would go down a lot slower if you hit them in the arms and the body, whereas if you got a headshot, it was almost a one shot every single time, and you got that satisfaction that if you well placed shot, you drop the creature just in one shot as it was running towards you. And then over night time, the creatures would be just amped up just that little bit more, so they're faster and more ferocious. And sort of with that, the other part that's good would be the atmosphere. The environment itself. There were a number of spooky sounds and events during the night time that just sort of really shook me a little bit and made me sort of second guess whether I should be leaving the house or move from a hiding spot. And as you're creeping through the grass of a nighttime, you would hear grass movement noises, and the sound would be coming from your side, so you'd immediately whip to the left, but there's not actually anything there, it's just an atmospheric sound. And while I was hiding in a house one time, there was a knocking on one of the windows. I was just about to walk out, and the knocking occurred, and it freaked me. I ended up just staying there and waiting to see if there was some kind of extra event that was going on. Would actually be nice if there was some extra events that went with that, because the atmosphere it created of knowing that there could be something just sort of looking in at you. Maybe if they actually had the creature's face sort of peering in the window after it knocked, and if you went outside it had already scarpered off. But the other one was, there was some snakes in the grass. I heard some hissing of a night time, so I couldn't even see it. I didn't know where it was, and I quickly bolted back into the house because I wasn't sure what I was about to run into. And lastly, there was one of the bosses. And so in my playthrough, I had the vampire. I believe there's also a witch that's a possible boss that can actually be running around the map. The boss, I didn't even hear it come up. And next thing you know, I've got this vampire beating me up in my face, and it was a bullet sponge. So I think I unloaded 2 clips of my pistol into it before it retreated and went back away. And that will be an interesting one also to see, as it's obviously something I wasn't able to experience, is that there's that overarching boss mechanic where you've got to go and search all the villages, find the remnants of a lost diary, which will give you the information that you need to craft things, to be able to make magic, and then obviously to ultimately defeat the evil that is in the area. And there will also be military events and secret locations that you can uncover. And so all of that sounds bloody wonderful. Obviously it needs time to get to it, and it also needs to be included, which a lot of this stuff wasn't actually included in the demo. And that well brings us to the end. Certainly one to keep an eye on, given that there's a demo. You can obviously go and play it and give this a little bit of a go for yourself. I will be interested to see where they go from here, mainly because I do want to see it fleshed out a lot more, and especially the UI elements. If they could unify the approach that they're taking with the UI so that you have a single experience all the way through with how you interact with all the objects, I think that would be wonderful. But also to see them flesh out the actual world itself, so that you're not just coming across a random building which actually contains nothing and is just a bare bones concrete hut with nothing inside it to even look at. So give the world and the level design a bit of a birthday, so that things look like they belong and are interesting to look at and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it is early in their journey, and this is only a demo, so there's obviously a lot more that's probably being held behind locked doors, so that you will actually find it a little bit interesting and maybe come back later when it's released and give it a real go. And I should certainly hope to do that myself. But thanks for listening in. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave me a comment down below what you think of this particular one. Maybe there's some comparative games that this could be compared to, like 7 Days to Die. It's not quite the same game. There's other games like the Wendigo and things like that, which have that kind of a hunt mechanic that a little bit more comparable, where they seem to be throwing in the survival elements. Maybe there's a comparison of a game and some comparisons to be made to say what was good and what was bad about those games compared to what we're seeing in this particular one. Anyway, thanks once again, and I'll catch you in the next one.